This is chapter 14, and we'll start with notes payable. And notes payable work a little different because when you make a payment, they work a little different because when you make a payment, you pay out part principal and part interest. This is in contrast to the bond payable that we've been working with. Let me give you an example. Suppose you borrow $60,000. Okay, so when you do that, you'll debit cash for $60,000, and you credit notes payable for $60,000. So this is what it's like when you borrow it. Now in this particular example, you're going to pay back in 6 annual payments. And the interest is 8%. Okay? Now, how much is the payment? Well, here's the way it works is, what we're going to use table 3. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an N of 6 and an I of 8. So what we're going to do is table 3 is the present value of an annuity. And so we're going to make 6 annual payments, and when we do that, we'll pay off the $60,000 principal and all the interest involved. Okay? So let me show you here. So what you're going to do is turn to table 3, go down the far left column till you find 6, go down from the 8% column, and you'll find the factor. So in table 3, you find the factor for an N of 6 and an I of 8. You find the factor of being 4.6229. So you want to take a minute, maybe shut off the tape, turn to table 3, the present value of an annuity, look across from 6, look down from 8, and you should find 4.6229. And so what we're going to do, and that'll be the factor. Let me show you how we're going to use the factor. So the present value equals the factor times the annuity. So the present value of all the annuity is $60,000. Okay? The factor for 8% over 6 payments is 4.6229, and we're looking for the annuity. So solve this equation. Divide both sides by 4.6229, and it turns out that the annuity will equal $12,979. So what this says is, every year we're going to send in $12,979. At the end of 6 years at 8% interest, we'll have paid off the $60,000 note. Now, let me show you how this works year by year. So let me put up some columns here. So in the far left column, we'll have period ending. And it'll be a date. Okay. In the next column, we'll have the beginning balance. In the next column, we'll have interest expense. In the next column, we'll have a debit to notes payable. In the next column, we'll have the cash. And in the next column, we'll have the ending balance. Now, I'm going to check that camera and make sure that all of that is on the screen. All right, I'll make it a little more level. Yep, all that'll be on the screen. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Now, so the first year ends 12/31/2011. Okay? At that point in time, the beginning balance, the amount we owe is $60,000. We've determined that the annuity, that every year we're going to send in $12,979 in cash. All right, so let's figure interest expense. So if we have $60,000, okay, so let me kind of work this out a little better. Now, what I'm going to do is move this. I want to make sure that I don't start writing off the screen. I'll move this over here. Okay. Now, and I just want to make sure the calculations are on there. So let's see how you guys will be able to see that, right? Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Interest equals principal times rate times time. Okay. So interest equals principal times rate times time. Okay? So in this case, for the first year, it's $60,000. It's 8% and it's 1 year. So that means the principal for the first year is $4,800. So that's how much of this $12,979 will go to interest expense. Now, if we send in $12,979, $4,800 of that went to pay off the interest. The difference of $8,179, that will go toward the principal. It will be a debit to notes payable. And if it started out at $60,000 and we paid off $8,179, now the principal is down to $51,821. Okay? So that's the first year. So now the second year, the year that ends 12/31/2012, so the beginning balance is $51,821. That's where I'm getting it right here. We're going to multiply that times 8% times 1 year, and the interest for that year will be $4,146. Okay? And if we have $5,821, if that's the balance, $4,146 went to the interest, the difference of $8,833 goes toward the principal, or is a debit to notes payable. So this is $8,833. The payment will always be the same. It'll be $12,979. And you guys listen, I put this in the wrong place. I was talking and thinking. So if it's $12,979 and we subtract $4,146, then the $8,833 goes toward the notes payable. By the way, this is Thursday of a long week. I'm tired, but this should be followable. Should be able to follow it. And then when we owed $51,821, we paid off, and we had $8,833 was applied to the principal. What's left, the new carrying value, will be $42,988. And then this becomes the beginning for the following year. If you carry this through all 6 years, you'll have paid off the full $60,000, and each year will be individually. Okay, so let's journalize this first year. So it'll be December 31. You have interest expense of $4,800, and and here's where I'm getting at. You'll have note payable. It'll be debited for $8,879. And cash will be credited for $12,979. Okay, does that sound good? So this is how a note payable works. You send in the same amount every year in this case. If you bought a car, it'd be your monthly payment. Okay, part of that goes toward principal, part goes to interest. You figure the interest on the carrying value, and then the difference between the interest and what you pay goes to the principal. In this case, it'll be a debit to notes payable. All right, listen, we've got a couple other short topics to cover, and that'll do the whole chapter. So, I'm going to move the camera down there. Let's cover these final two short topics, and we'll be good to go. So let me move this, okay, move this down here. So, one, we had the ratio in this chapter is the debt to equity. And that equals total liability divided by total equity. And it shows what portion is owned by the creditors, what portion is owned by the owners. And basically, it varies by industry. If you're in an industry that has a huge amount of assets, like car manufacturer needs a factory and all that, then you'll have more liability than you would if you were a service business. You may want to consult, and I've mentioned this before, Dun & Bradstreet, their industry averages, and see how your industry works. As a general rule, if you have no debt, you're in your longevity is most likely to happen. It's because when you have a business downturn, you don't have that that demand for your cash outlay. The problem with having no debt is your business is too small. So you want to borrow a reasonable amount, an amount you can manage. That will give you the most assets to work with and give you the most money-making capability. But this allows you to put everything in perspective. This ratio does. The other topic we had was were leases. Okay. So what happened here? This happened, let me give you a little bit of a historical background. Maybe 20 years ago, what would happen is a whole bunch of companies would lease equipment. And then at the end of the lease, the person who leased them would keep the equipment. FASB says, wait a minute, we're not talking about a rental agreement here, we're talking about a purchase. I don't care what you call it, this is not rental. So out of that came two categories. Now, there's one category of leases called operational leases. And this is where you actually rent something. So, if you rent a car from Avis on a business trip, that's an operational lease, it's a rental agreement, shows up as an expense on the income statement. Okay? By contrast, there's a capital lease. And a capital lease is one where the rewards and the burden of ownership are transferred from the person who's leasing to the person who actually does the leasing. So the leasee has all the rewards and risks of ownership. So for instance, an example of a capital lease. At the end of the lease period, you get to keep the asset. Okay, that's a capital lease. Or at the end of the lease period, you get to buy the asset at a greatly reduced cost. Or the lease period is the same as the useful life, or 75% of the useful life. That's a capital lease. And if it's capital lease, what you do is you debit the asset for the present value of all the lease payments, and you credit a liability account for the same amount. And you depreciate the asset in the normal way. If it's a house, it's a straight line depreciation. If it's an auto, it'll be some sort of accelerated depreciation. And then when you pay off the liability, it's on the same basis that we just showed you with a note. Part of that goes to the principal and part goes to the interest. And then at the end of the lease payment, everything will be paid out, but it's in the same basis as we had with the note. So, that should cover chapter 14, and I'm going to shut off the camera and post this to Moodle, and good luck, you guys. Okay.